Okay, sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's work. Yeah, 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 yeah. Nice, nice.
Actually, both Amber and I were speaking about the turn up, and we're really surprised that a lot of people are really interested in this topic. So this is a very interesting topic, and you don't really find it in mainstream sort of discussions about Islamic art and architecture with a traditional city, even though it's quite prevalent. And some of us who have visited Cairo or visited other traditional Islamic cities or other traditional cities for that matter, you cannot really escape that symbolism. It's really everywhere you go, and we'll be talking more about that. Let me just share my screen with you so you're able to see the screen. It's very important for me that I'm sharing these images with you. Uh, I do welcome questions. So what I will do is basically speak for a bit, maybe 35 to 40 minutes, and then I will follow that with questions. Um, um, I think it's appropriate for me to start by introducing myself. So my name is Mohammed Al Gindi. I am a sociologist by training. So I studied societies, how societies change and how societies develop and how societies basically transition from one stage to another. I studied mainly modern societies, but I also studied traditional societies, whether in Europe or also in basically in Egypt and other areas in North Africa, and also in Andalusia. So my studies at the beginning were primarily focused on the Western narrative. So I studied in the UK. I studied basically social theory from a European perspective, but I was really not very satisfied with the answers that were given. So I turned towards traditional studies and I turned towards studying something that we can talk about maybe in our discussion today, which is metaphysics. And that opened up a whole big world of explanations and of new realities that I was exploring. And these were really compelling, and they still are quite compelling, but they actually made me feel I'm, in a sense, very satisfied, and I'm really enlightened by the answers that I'm getting. And then a full circle happens when basically I realized that society in the past was studied by people who were looking at it holistically under the title of Ilm al-Imran, which basically translates as the science of society. Science of society, aka sociology, included many sciences, which includes urbanism, architecture, like the design of the city. All of that was included under that holistic science. Of course, having many sort of, so to speak, divisions, but everybody would be familiar with that holistic image. So you're building for the city as a living being rather than building for a city in a very sort of fragmented way as we see nowadays. People specialize in one area and therefore they forget about everything else. So without further ado, let me share my screen with you. Yeah. So so the lecture today is about symbolism and particularly of traditional Cairo or Islamic Cairo as it's called. And what we see in Islamic Cairo, as I was saying earlier, that symbolism is basically across the city, everywhere, whatever you do, like you basically have to stumble across that symbolism. And in a sense, it's hidden in plain sight. You can really see it, like maybe like, behind like some kind of a street stall or like, or some kind of like a really old building or something. You really have to kind of, in a sense, look for it. But when you do, you really see it everywhere. And for our session today, we're going to be going across some of the very prominent symbols and images of Islamic Cairo. But what we're going to do right now is basically have a very quick introduction of the main purpose or the main ideas behind that sort of session. So what I want to do today is introduce symbolism from a traditional perspective rather than looking at symbolism as if it was some kind of a coincidental sort of endeavor or some kind of a sort of result of a political struggle or something else. I want to look at it as a very deliberate process that was taking place very consciously in the minds of the artisans, in the minds of the architects, and other people in society. And what we're going to be doing also is look at how that symbolism is also sort of conveying higher meanings in society, conveying meanings that people were maybe held consciously and subconsciously, which is a very important sort of distinction to make. So let me just turn this on. So we're going to be talking today about something in particular. There's different types of symbolisms, but we're going to be specifically discussing visual symbolism. That is symbolism that you can see with your eyes. Other types of symbolisms include auditory symbolism, which is things you can hear, such as the call to prayer, for instance, or even calling someone's name. You basically are, in effect, using symbolism. But we're going to be talking about symbolism across Cairo and across many centuries. And what we realize is basically that symbolism is everywhere, as we said, on furniture, in markets, on city walls, in palaces, obviously in mosques, in zawiyas, which is basically the Sufi lodges. So they're everywhere and across the different dynasties, in the Tulid dynasties, the Fatimids, the Ayyubids, the Mamluks, and the Ottomans, and even the Alawis, Muhammad Ali's family that ruled over Egypt. So all of these people resorted to symbolism. So what do we make of these symbols that keep recurring across centuries? And in a sense, they're universal, they're not changing. Some of the very early symbols, like they continue to be used across maybe a millennium, like over 1,000 years, over very long centuries. So as I was saying earlier, some people attributed that to political struggles. So certain symbolism would be used by Fatimids, but not the Ayyubids, for instance. And these are kind of competing dynasties that ruled over Egypt. But we do see that when the Ayyubids took over Egypt, the reality is that they have not sort of removed a lot of the symbolism that was present in the Fatimid Cairo. As a matter of fact, they use the same symbolism across their own vestiges, across their own architecture, whether it was in Egypt or, of course, the Levant, in Syria, Palestine. So how do we make sense of that? That's a very important question that comes to mind. So rather than ruling it out as purely for design, as purely to look nice or to not to be boring or something, I want to look at it from a different perspective. And that is basically the idea behind the session. Before I move on, I would like to say that we have to have one assumption in mind as we think about symbolism. And that assumption is that is based on the Islamic tradition, in which everything in the manifested world, everything that we can see, points to a higher meaning, right? Points to something higher in the immutable forms, and basically in the higher domains that basically have where the realities are. Um, uh, so what is sacred symbolism? What is a sacred symbol? A sacred symbol is not like any other symbol. It's unique in that it conveys higher meanings. And these meanings are universal in a sense. So a symbol conveys higher meanings, metaphysical meanings, to our sensible world, or it brings it to our sensible world, right? So it uses the language of primordial knowledge of what we call in the Islamic tradition the fitra, which is the ability to see things as they really are. And it conveys it to us in our material world, right? So the origin of symbolism can be seen as a non-human or like suprahuman, above the human mind. It's not relevant to the rational faculty. It's not a physical or a sensorial sort of issue, but it's a question of spirituality. It's a higher, even sort of level of knowledge. And therefore, there's some kind of a symbolism. There's some kind of a correspondence between a symbol, right, and what it conveys. And this is something that will come across later on. So what we have here is basically the idea of a law of correspondence. So the idea of unity, for instance, is usually conveyed with a circle with a center point, right? So if you basically compact that circle, if you basically put back that circumference to where it belongs, to the center point, when you draw with a compass, you're using that kind of like center point. So you basically put back everything to where it belongs, into that one singular point. But there is an indefinite number of points on that circumference. So in a sense, this is not real unity, but it's just a symbol of unity, right? So you can see that the symbol shares something with what it tries to convey. And this law of symbolism is very important. This law of correspondence is very important, as we will come to get to know a bit about it later on in our discussion, inshallah. So this again emphasizes that symbolism is not just an outward sign, but it's something that conveys a higher principle using an analogy, using a sort of an example that kind of relates to the human mind. So while symbolism expresses universal truth, it also differs from one culture to another only in the outward sense. So, for instance, if we look at the non-Islamic, for instance, civilizations such as the Hindu civilization, the Vedic civilization, or the Christian civilization, or other civilizations, they also have an idea of unity. They convey it differently than it is conveyed in Islam, right? But it's still the same meaning. They want to convey the same meaning. And we'll see that also in one of the examples, actually, a few of the examples that I have for you from Cairo. Very importantly, also symbolism does something really stunning, which is beauty. It really beautifies because it brings these higher meanings from higher realities, how people can have these kind of visions of paradise, and then they basically put them into our sensorial world. They see images of beautiful harmony, where they see images of beautiful plants, vegetal ornamentation, and they begin to sort of like, carve it on the walls of a palace or in the furniture. Again, these are examples that I'll be sharing with you. Another point about symbolism is that symbolism is a bit tricky because symbolism is not just to be seen from one angle, or it doesn't even have a single meaning. This means that symbolism can be seen from different levels depending on where you are. So a symbolism can have a bodily meaning at the level of our corporeal existence, but it can also have a psychological meaning, which can be philosophized, because philosophy is an outcome of the irrational mind, but also has a spiritual meaning, and that's the higher meaning. And within these levels, there are, of course, many sub-levels, if you will. So that's a very important and a confusing point, because usually our minds today, like when I was thinking early on about symbolism, I was thinking, okay, this sign means this and this sign means that. In reality, you can't really have some kind of a table with corresponding. It doesn't really work that way. It doesn't really work that way. You have to, in a sense, be open-minded to the different levels of symbolism. Habiba, I'm sorry. Can you, yeah, if you can mute your mic, I'm sorry. So multiple meanings according to the multiple sort of degrees of existence where we stand. The other, or one of the last points that I want to make about symbolism before we start to see actual symbols, is that symbolism has a ritualistic impact, in the sense that symbolism can have the same impact prayer can have on a person, not as a replacement for prayer, not as a replacement for some kind of a ritual that we do in the religious sphere, but it does have that kind of support to our meditation. It gives you support when you, for instance, enter into a Sultan Hassan. And as you go and walk through the narrow pathway of a Sultan Hassan, as you make your way to the courtyard, just before you go to the prayer area, you're really cleansing your body, you're really cleansing your vision and your hearing from basically all of the things from the outside. In a sense, you're preparing yourself for presence. So you can see that symbolism with architecture helps you, in a sense, be present fully. If you want to be present fully. So in this way, it gives you access to metaphysical realities, intellectual realities, things that cannot be spoken of, things that you can taste rather than speak of. That's the kind of effect that it has. So let's start with our first principle and the way it's conveyed. Let's start really with the symbolism of unity and the center. Symbolism of unity and the center is something that is quite prevalent in Islamic Cairo, but also in Andalusia, obviously in North Africa, in Turkey, in Bosnia, and so in the Levant, in so many places in the Gulf. So it's a very, very prominent type of symbolism. So what it does is basically focuses us on the origin of things. Everything begins from that unity of order, unity of existence, if you will. And everything begins to take its origin and takes its root from that point, and thereby multiplicity happens. And this is best conveyed with that circle that we see on the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side, you have the roof of the main hall, or the prayer Iwan of the Sultan Barquq in Cairo. And it looks like a fountain. They say it looks like a fountain, but you can see that the fountain, there is like a specific point from which the water originates, and it, in a sense, kind of ripples out. But it doesn't just ripple out. You can see that it's a beautiful fountain because it's full of this vegetal sort of ornamentation. You can see flowers, you can see Quranic calligraphy. So it's full of these grand meanings, but they all start from that focal point and spread outward, if you will. But they all are in the orbit of that sort of reality, in the orbit of that origin, right? They all rotate around that specific central point. If we look to the middle, right in the center, this also belongs to Sultan Faraj ibn Barquq. And this is basically a cabinet from, I assume, one of his palaces. It's in the Islamic Museum in Cairo, Islamic Arts Museum in Cairo. And this cabinet has clearly a right side and a left side, but in the center, you can see that there's a very uniquely shaped space. And in a sense, it resolves the right side with the left side. So in a sense, that duality is resolved in the middle, again, because it originates from that center. If you look to the left, the very left, you find a door. And this door, I think, belongs to the late Mamluk period, which is about 15th century. So we're talking 5 centuries ago. And you clearly see that there are these rosettas or these stars. There's 2 stars. And there's a continuation of that pattern. You can see it in the corners, specifically of that door. But the idea is you have these stars, again, with an origin, which means that you don't only have one origin, but you have origins. But this doesn't really make sense in the Islamic tradition. So what this actually means is basically these are mirrors of that origin, right? In their own right, they stand as a representation, a good representation of that original point. And therefore, they act as that kind of like focal point to their own communities or to their own neighborhoods or to their own crafts. So these kind of representations are quite prominent. So that's the representation basically of the unity and the center in like some of the representations. Of course, there's like, an indefinite number of that in Islamic Cairo. Now that we've talked about the singular point, the original point, now we can talk about something else. We talk about multiplicity, right? And multiplicity in the Islamic tradition, and so is the case in Far Eastern, of course, civilizations and cultures, is best represented in the white and black, the black, if I may say, the black first and then the white after. And this is obviously, I think a lot of people would be familiar with the one in the center, which is the yin and the yang, right? So you have the white separated with a winding sort of line from the black, but you can see that within the white there's black and within the black there's white. And similarly, in the Islamic tradition, you have that kind of interlocking of the black and white. If you look carefully, especially at the lintels of the door, or if you look on the right-hand side, you can see that there's a medallion right in the middle, and you can see these like floral patterns. They're in a sense interlocked. The black is interlocked with the white. And on the left-hand side, you also see the same in that door. So on the right-hand side, this is the door of Sultan Faraj ibn Barquq, his madrasa, his school in Cairo. And on the left-hand side, you have one of the schools in Sultan Hassan, one of the doors inside of Sultan Hassan to a school within Sultan Hassan. But going back to the symbolism of the black and white, you have basically that idea that since creation basically started, there is no separation between good and evil. So in Islam, we don't have the problem of evil. In the far Eastern sort of religions and cultures, we don't have the issue of evil. Why did God do that? If he's such a kind God, why would he basically allow for children to die in war? Why would the suffering happen? Why would God be angry? These types of questions never really occur in the Muslim mind, especially if it's trained through the traditional path, because it's very familiar that anything good also comes with the bad. So what we can see is basically that our hearts, our existence is between the 2 fingers. That's what we say in the Islamic tradition, is between the 2 fingers of the All-Merciful, Ar-Rahman. And they're said that the 2 fingers are basically the qabd and the bust. So the basically contraction and the expansion, right? Or the jalal and the jamal, the majesty and the beauty. So everything is basically between these 2 sort of like, tendencies, and they keep us turning, except if we will basically, in a sense, resolve them. And this is why we have a center point again. In these basically in the two images on the right and on the left, in the Islamic tradition, you find that the resolution of the black and white resolves itself in the medallion in the middle. I don't know if everybody can see it. So the medallion in the middle is basically that star in the middle. Yeah, Amar, okay. And on the left-hand side, you have a door. You have two sides, but you have a door that resolves that issue. And if you know basically where this door leads, it leads you basically to the study of traditional sciences, the Islamic sciences, the way, the path basically to the Muhammadan path, or basically the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is basically to put the worries of the world behind you, but not just to put the worries of the world behind you, but also to take his path. This way you're able to connect with basically his teachings, but also like the higher realities that come with that, or basically the beauty that you're able to summon as a result of that sort of path or approach that you take. So now we've talked about two things, unity, and we've talked about duality. So it's appropriate now to start sort of exploring other meanings that come or come across the eye, or you see them across Islamic Cairo. One of which is the swastika. So the swastika is a very common symbol that you see across the city. So what we see in front of us on the right-hand side is a sabil, so a public water fountain. Belongs to the Ottoman period, but this is right in front of, it's in a very central location in Islamic Cairo, very close to the Sultan Qalawun, a very central area of Islamic Cairo. It used to be a main street, or the main axis of the city that connected the north to the south. And on the left-hand side, we have the entrance to a Sultan Hassan. I'm not sure if everybody will be able to spot the one in a Sultan Hassan, which is on the left-hand side. But if you look at the tiles, it's basically not the first tile, but obviously the second tile, which is, it's basically conveyed through these, like, that square that is, yeah, that's the first tile right now. So it's basically that square that indicates that there is a square within that is fixed, and everything around it is, in a sense, in motion. Again, there is a fixed axis. On the right-hand side, there is a fixed axis, and then you can find that everything around it is in motion. And what that signifies is basically that idea that your principle is above worldly change. So this world of ours is a world of becoming, is a world of change, is a world of shifting. Everything is quickly changing. People can change their minds. People see that their interest has, like, shifted from one position to another, and so do they change their minds over that. The thinking is different, the change is different, the circumstances are different. But what we emphasize, if you want to reach that higher reality, if you want to establish paradise on earth, if you want to see paradise on earth, then you have to have a fixed principle. And that fixed principle is, so to speak, is the unmoved mover. This is an Aristotelian sort of term that refers basically to that meaning of stableness, despite the fact that everything around you is changing. Everybody is telling you that you need to stand up for yourself. You need to have twisted ways, otherwise you'll never get ahead. You can never like live in this like kind of in a sense spiritual way, because you'll be swept away, because it doesn't have any impact or any meaning in this life. But the reality of basically the tradition tells you that you can actually have a lot of sort of like, stability, and have a lot of strength as a result of like sticking to your own principles. And this is conveyed in that kind of icon, or that kind of symbol of the swastika, the unmoved mover. So we spoke a bit earlier about the stars, and we spoke about like, these different formations or rosettas. And constellations and stars are very important in the Islamic tradition. We see them in books, whether they are so like quote unquote religious books or non-religious books, but you also see them on doors, and you see them as ways to ornament a lot of things, really. But these, of course, have a lot of meanings. But one of the meanings that really comes to mind, or like I'll share with you two meanings, and then we can move on to another symbol. One of the meanings is basically that the Prophet ﷺ was considered to be, Prophet Muhammad was considered to be the sun, right? He's the origin of basically godly knowledge. He's the completion. Muslims believe that he's the seal of all prophets, and therefore he basically brings that completion of knowledge, of godly knowledge, of what has been sealed from other civilizations. He reopened it, right? So you basically, when you take his path, you're also reopening these sort of like, gates. But what that happened during basically that first generation, his companions became sort of a reflection of his lights. So they're not really a sun of their own, but they are basically stars. They're stars around him, right? And this is why in the Quran there's a famous verse that says وَعَلَامَاتٍ وَبِالنَّجْمِ هُمْ يَهْتَدُونَ. This is Surah An-Nahl. This is the one that I'm sharing with you right in the middle of the page, in the middle of the slide. And basically what it says, it literally says landmarks and stars they use to for guidance. And this doesn't refer to the use of stars in navigation in the sea or the desert. Maybe this was the case at some point, or maybe is still the case, the polar star if you're basically sailing or something. But it has also a higher meaning, right? And the higher meaning is that you are using the companions of the Prophet to basically relate to their lives and relate to your own life, so you can basically deal with your own problems in similar ways. That way you maintain these principles intact. But also there is another meaning. There's something that also Sheikh al-Akbar Muhyiddin ibn Arabi speaks about, which is basically that the alamat, these marks, or basically these stars, are in us as basically a representation of the universe. So if the universe is the macrocosm, we are the microcosm. We are the smaller universe, right? So in us, there are stars. There are things that give us guidance. For instance, a very simple example deals with food, right? So I like, for instance, a certain type of food, and I have this kind of craving for it. But I know that that craving basically is a cause for some kind of a disturbance of my mind, or some kind of a like a distraction, or like excessive use, for instance, of social media. Then I realized that this for me is a guidance. I'm remembering something about myself, giving me deep knowledge of myself, that I should be straying away from that I should be limiting myself from something that leads me to a distracted mind, or leads me to overindulgence or overconsumption, which is bad for my health. So in a sense, I'm taking my cue from my own self rather than waiting for someone to tell me what to do. So it's a way for me to know myself by exploring, in a sense, myself and my appetites, and in a sense, reining them in rather than having them control me. So these constellations take on different meanings. I just wanted to share two different meanings so I can basically show you the diversity of meanings that can be extracted from these symbols. Next up is a wonderful sign, really very unique and very special. Here we're dealing with the spiral and the helix, right? So the difference between the spiral and the helix. So the spiral is basically the horizontal, right? Whereas the helix is the 3D, right? So you can see that it has that kind of sort of vertical and horizontal lines, whereas the spiral is only horizontal. And where this is conveyed, you can see it on the left-hand side in the minarets. So the minarets are basically have this upward looking shape. They have these cylinders, and within that cylinder, you basically have different balconies or different stages. I'm speaking of Cairo, of course, because there are different types of minarets across the Islamic world. Specifically, the type that you find in Cairo, specifically the Mamluk one, you'll find that they have like three different balconies, a square base, and then three different balconies. And one of the meanings of these like different balconies is basically the stages of being. So we have the stage of being in which we belong right now, the physical, sensorial world. But we have another world which we all can access very quickly, psychological. If I tell you to imagine a watch, I don't have to see it, but you can imagine it, right? I think most of us will be able to do that. We can conjure up that image very quickly. So this is the psychological stage. But there is an even higher stage, which is the spiritual stage. So in a sense, the minaret represents that elevation, right, from the physical, the very sensorial, the very hard in its sort of like, feel, to a higher world, which is the psychological, in a sense, the imaginal, world, and then an even higher world, which is the spiritual world. So in a sense, we can see that we're elevating. So the elevation works in a it's an outcome of these sort of spiritual practices, or the control of one's appetites and the discipline of oneself, what we call in Arabic riyadat al-nafs, or basically they call it the practice of controlling one's desire, or fighting against one's desire. This is represented in so many versions, but I wanted to share with you, like, some of them that I came across from them in very different places. So the one in the middle belongs to a ribat, right? And this belongs to the city of the dead in Cairo, very close to uh, Qaid Bay. It's an abandoned place, and it's a magnificent place, but it's really abandoned. It looks unfortunately quite rusty and dusty, but the beauty is still there. You can still see these signs. If you walk up close, you can really spot them. And one of the things that I spotted above the door is that one right in the center, and that's the spiral, right? So this is the horizontal one. And then on the right-hand side, this is a place that is AKA secular, right? So it's not religious, if you will. And yet you find that reminder of that spiritual elevation, which is a palace. This is the Qasr al-Amir Taz, or basically the palace of the Prince Taz, which is located very close to Ibn Tulun Mosque, just maybe like a 3-minute walk or a 4-minute walk from Ahmad ibn Tulun, very central in basically Islamic Cairo. So what we find here is that idea, again, of a spiral and a helix coming back again and again to remind us of that spiritual elevation that you can have, regardless whether this is a religious or a non-religious building. The reminders are always around us. You have to be reminded of something. If you're reminded of something, you better be reminded of something that elevates you rather than brings you down. That's the idea of that. Now we move on to another symbolism of minarets, again, the Cairo minarets. And here's, in a sense, you can say um, you can say it's like a feminine representation, or basically the representation of talaqqi. So Allah says that in the Quran, Allah says that وَتَلَقَّى Adam كَلِمَاتٌ مِّن رَبِّهِ, like, Adam has kind of, in a sense, received words like you do with a satellite dish. You have talaqqi, which is kind of it's not something that you say, but something that you receive as a result of, not of your rational calculations or because you're very smart, because it's a feeling that makes you see a meaning in your life. You can really understand something about yourself right now that was never clear to you. So that type of understanding comes from the heavens, directly from the heaven to you. So that's the open access that you have in the Islamic tradition. You can receive godly knowledge immediately. And this is again represented in a sense in that ovary shape of a flower. You can see, I shared the ovary shape with you on the right-hand side. So you can see it in different places around Cairo, again, across several, a couple of centuries at least. So the one on the right-hand side is the minaret of Faraj ibn Barqouq, Shara al-Mu'izz, very central, like the street that I mentioned earlier of the main street of Islamic Cairo. And the one in the middle is on Bab al-Wazir, and that would be the door to, the minaret of the Blue Mosque. And the one on the left, you can see two of them, and they belong to Al-Azhar. So you can see that representation of that kind of ovary shape, or that kind of like egg shape, is something that, in a sense, that fertility for spirituality is always there. Like, people are reminded, in a sense, that always be ready to receive these kind of meanings wherever you are. And may I also note that Cairo is the city of the 1,000 minarets. But what is very interesting also about these minarets, that they were, back in the day, of course, were visible from anywhere around the city, because there was a custom in Cairo that you could not build a building that is higher than a dome or a minaret. So minarets, in a sense, oriented you around the city, and you can see them from wherever you were. So in a sense, they were open access reminder to that sort of elevation, meaning and reception from the heavens. Now we move on to a very also unique symbolism, again, very prominent in the Islamic tradition, very prominent in very important mosques in Cairo, which is the Seal of Solomon. Unfortunately, people call it the Star of David nowadays, but this is a very, very new name and a very politicized name as well. But the name in the Islamic tradition is the Seal of Solomon. So Khatam Sulaiman. And the Seal of Solomon repeats itself. You can see it in so many places, but I shared with you very prominent places around Islamic Cairo. We have on the right-hand side the main prayer hall of Sultan Hassan. You can see it at the very top. I don't know if you can see the window, but there is two of them. But you basically, if you see the mihrab, I hope everybody's familiar with the mihrab, but the mihrab is that enclave in the hollowing of the space in the wall that you can see on the right-hand side. But just above it, you'll be able to see a medallion. And just above it, all the way to the top between the two windows, you can see another window, which is white. But both of them have that hexagonal shape or that seal of Solomon. And then on the left-hand side, right in the center, you can see it in the Mosque of Qaitbay. So that's in the cemetery, the city of the dead. And on the left-hand side, it's kind of like sideways, but you can see it in the windows of the school that belongs to Sultan Qalawun, again on the main street of Islamic Cairo that I mentioned earlier, Shara al-Mu'izz. So very peculiar, very interesting shape. The star, that star is a very interesting shape because what it represents is basically two triangles, one pointing upwards and the other one pointing downwards, right? And usually it's conveyed with a dot in the middle, right? So you can draw a circle and then there's a circle, and within that circle you have that star. So what this represents is basically the meeting of two basically domains, right? The domain of this earth, the earthly domain, with the heavenly domain, right? So that these realms are meeting, right? And in the center there's something. But they also represent something else which is very intriguing, which is the meeting of the spirit and the body. As a result of that meeting between the spirit of the body, we have an-nafs, we have the soul in the Islamic tradition. So the ruh met with al-jasad, so the ruh met with basically the body, the spirit met with the body, and as a result of that meeting, they have the nafs, or basically your ego. The ego in the Islamic tradition has two aspects to it, right? One lower and one higher. So it can be pulled downwards or it can be lifted upwards, right? So it can go in either direction. That's the idea of that sort of two triangles coming together. So the meeting of these two triangles with that dot in the middle is a representation of the heart, right? So the heart is basically where the two meet. It's basically the physical heart, not just the physical heart, but also the spiritual heart, in the sense your mirror to reflect higher realities. So in a sense, we have also, like in the Islamic tradition, the very profound hadith that Allah or God speaks about himself, saying that his heavens and his earth were not enough for him to reside, but he can reside in the heart of the true abd, or basically the true servant, right? So that kind of coming together of these two worlds is the maskan, right? Is the house of Allah. And this is again in the Jewish tradition, of course. I think they call it the holiest of the holies. And that's why they call it the Star of David. So it's a very iconic, of course, emblem for Jewish people. So it's very important. But what we can see is also that this is something that Muslims, are very familiar with, and they use it in an authentic way. It's not just a matter of borrowing without understanding, but it's a matter of borrowing because of seeing. So I don't know if maybe I can talk about that after when we open up the discussion, inshallah. Let me wrap up. Before I wrap up, very interestingly, this is the dome, one of two domes in the cemetery, also belonging to a Sultan Barquq, Faraj ibn Barquq. He has a beautiful Sufi lodge. He has a beautiful lodge in the cemetery. And on the two sides of the lodge, you have that dome. And as you can see, the dome has this very peculiar shape, these zigzags, right? And they're topped with that kind of finial, the copper finial on top of the dome. And you can see, you cannot mistake it, but it looks like a boat, right? So there's that, symbolism of the crossing, the person was buried here has crossed from this world. He's crossed that threshold, right? He's into he's basically was able to cross the seas of the ego, the seas of the self, and was able to cross to the other side where realities and are evident without any need for proof or any need for discussions. So this is my presentation. I just want to give some time for discussion, and I want to hear from like as many people as possible. That would be delightful. But what I want to emphasize again is that symbolism was used as a way to remind people, right? So not that everybody was conscious of these meetings. Not everybody would tell you, yeah, that's the Seat of Solomon. Yeah, of course, this is the minaret, so it's the elevation. It's not about that. It's basically about taste. It's what you can see for yourself and what you can understand for yourself. Keep in mind that the city back in the day was not full of advertising, was not full of distracting things right, left, and center. But in a sense, the city was a beautiful place, especially Cairo. And maybe like, it's difficult to imagine that if you've been to Cairo lately, but you can really see these elements. When you go to these places, you can really sense the beauty of the city, that some people, these artisans, were able to bring in these beautiful meanings that they could see in their own capacity as they were meditating, as they were praying, as they were doing remembrance of God. They were able to bring in these meanings as reminders for others. And because of the power of authenticity, because these icons were very authentic, they also enabled others to also participate in them, to actually have the benefit of these as reminders for themselves. That's why you find these triangles, rectangles, panels when you enter into a big traditional mosque in Cairo. And that really distinguishes that kind of a sacred art from religious art. So they are two different sort of like, categories. With that, I would like to conclude my talk, so I'll stop speaking now. But I want to thank you, and I would like to take that opportunity to say that I'm very, again, honored and happy to be here because of, Ammar and everybody. So it's such a pleasure and honor. But do get in touch with me. I left my contact information, and I have a bi-weekly reading circle in which I discuss prominent works dealing with sacred art and architecture. I specifically try to focus on Islamic art and architecture, but I try to draw on basically authentic traditional arts and crafts of different civilizations. With that, I'll just hand in the mic to my friend Ammar, and thank him again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Muhammad. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for that amazing presentation. Inshallah, this is one of many. I see more coming, inshallah, in the future. I have done a terrible job of introducing myself, so I'll do that quickly right now. I am Ammar Muhsin. I'm from Turathi, and my work relates very similarly to Muhammad, where we talk about how we can fix a lot of our issues almost anywhere in the world if we just stick to our traditional architecture with our modern tech and also focus on human first urbanism. And that's it really. That's me at least. So inshallah, no one gets confused. See why I'm here. Okay, cool. So thank you, Muhammad, once again. Truly, you have been humbled by your presence and mashallah, your expertise. Truly, I wish it was a 3-hour lecture like I'm used to, but today's age, it's a bit difficult to get these peanut brain people, me included, of course, by the way, to focus for more than half an hour. So thank you very much for this amazing presentation. I will let anyone that does not want to speak to write their questions in the comments while I give you my questions. I have, I think, only two. First things first, Egypt, of course, has around 7,000, 6,000, some say 8,000 years of history. And a lot of people have come here, the Ismailis, the Fatimids, the, let's say, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, even pre-Islamic people, the Greco-Romans. A lot of different societies came to Cairo, sorry, not Cairo, let's say Egypt in general. So do you feel like the pre-Islamic empires and civilizations have also left a mark on Egypt as a whole? Or do you feel like maybe the focus here in Cairo and let's say even the wider Egyptian era, do you feel like their influence has also been felt elsewhere in Egypt, or is Egypt now primarily and mostly an Islamic civilization relic? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. No, obviously Egypt is definitely more than the Islamic civilization. Definitely not, because of course, like the pyramids and the very many temples and the churches and the synagogues, we still have a lot of that, of course. And I'm personally like very happy that Egypt can be a home to all of these great civilizations and cultures and religions. And the pharaonic civilization you can't really miss in Cairo. I live in a location in Cairo where I can see the pyramids literally every day, not from up close, but from a distance because I live on a hill. So they're really grand, and you can see them 140 meters high, even though we live in a valley, so it's a bit lower. I can still see them, and they're quite profound. But the reason why I'm really interested in Islamic civilization is because, like Islamic civilization in the Islamic art and architecture, and of course, like I believe in the spirituality, but this is not a promotion or anything. But in the Islamic arts and architecture, it's kind of the completion of traditional civilizations in the way that brings beauty from everywhere, not in the way of borrowing, again, inauthentically, but borrowing very authentically from others, knowing full well what they are borrowing, knowing full well what, in a sense, they are reviving of the traditional meanings, while avoiding, in a sense, the kind of like, some of the pit holes that ancient civilizations have fell in. And don't take my word for it. There is Plato and Aristotle, Plato and Socrates in specific. They have written grand narratives of the decline of civilization. 600 BC is a big time, and you see the Muslim civilizations, in a sense, using all of that human civilization to kind of put something forward in a sense that is complete. That's my take on Islamic art and architecture. That is why I'm so compelled, because it showed that Islamic art and architecture is not just Islamic art and architecture. It's a mirror of how people have lived. I cannot say the same for pharaohs, for instance, even though I really cherish the pharaonic civilization very much, but you really see a downturn towards the end without going too much into details, because this is not the topic of the discussion.
Let's get that on paper. You said you're very much proud of the, let's say, the pharaohs, right? You're talking about the same pharaoh from Quran, right?
No, no, no. So in the Quran, this is an exception, by the way. Like in the Quran, like the pharaohs, they're mentioned also like very beautifully in the story of Joseph. They're mentioned very, very beautifully in a way, like there's you can see that the king is a just king, and he's really like, when he knew the real story of Prophet Joseph, he really wanted to support him. So this is a pharaoh as well, but he didn't call himself a pharaoh, right? He called himself a king, because he could realize that he's not the spiritual authority. He was only a temporal authority. He's only a political authority. Whereas the pharaoh of like Moses, of Prophet Moses, was someone who thought he combined both. I'm both the spiritual and the temporal. I'm everything. But this has been a separation that has been made, which has only been made possible again by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But this is a different direction of my discussion. Happy to discuss it, but I want to bring in questions related to symbolism and the arts and architecture, even though it's a fascinating topic.
Absolutely perfect. Okay, cool. So I'll let people now. Thank you very much for everyone with their kind words towards Muhammad and me. Thank you very much, truly. Yeah. So I'll give it like maybe 2 minutes now while I announce a couple of things coming in the future now. Let them write their questions, and whoever wants to join in, by the way, you can stop me any second now. This is now the discussion area. I think we'll let maybe 10 more questions, and then I will stop recording so that the video doesn't get too long. But yeah, if anyone wants to write their questions, I'll read them out to Muhammad. Otherwise, I just want to make a small announcement. Um, uh, in, let's say, a week or maybe a week and a half, we'll see. Inshallah, I will be taking my turn with presenting, and it will be mostly about the Islamic civilization and how we can have another renaissance, or in this case, a golden age, because typically people think that a golden age basically means, okay, that was their peak and khalas, that's it, no more development, no more evolution, no more progress. And I think the Islamic world and Arab world have a lot to show. Me as a Bahraini, I'm very much into, let's say, Samarkand in Uzbekistan, very much interested in Fez in Morocco, very much interested in, let's say, Baku in Azerbaijan. And these are usually put on the sidelines. So inshallah, in 1 week or two, I will be having a presentation. That's about it. So Mira said, I would like to ask more about the Seal of Solomon. Mira, if you want, you can just unmute yourself if you want. If not, write down a question. We'll read out to Muhammad. I would like to know about Iman Negi. I'm so sorry, guys. These Egyptian names are difficult for me. I would like to know about the differences between early Islamic architecture and its development after appropriation of other architectures post-conquest and how they relate to philosophy. Thank you, Iman.
Should I answer the first question or the second question? Because there were two questions,
Okay.
I believe.
Forgive me. I think Mira needs to
Let me
ask,
separate them. It's better to separate them, don't you think? Should I begin with the Seal of Solomon?
Assalamu
Yeah.
alaikum. May I
Wa alaikum
talk?
salam.
May,
Please,
may
yes.
I
Yeah, go ahead.
may I ask
Yeah,
the
yeah.
question? Okay. Hello, assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Mira. I'm a tour guide in Lebanon, specialized in Tripoli. How are you, Muhammad? Okay, so my question is because I have a lot of questions when I get tourists about the Seal of Solomon. Like everybody's like intrigued about this symbol. And I did a lot of research and I realized that this is a very pre-Islamic, pre-monotheist like symbol. And my question is that I mean it's related to the divine, as you said, the earth, the earth and the heaven, the body and the spirit, and you know the feminine, the masculine. There's a lot of interpretation. But my question is that you said the Muslims borrowed some symbols from, for example, here the Jews, but also like in what way they borrowed it, and are we sure that they borrowed it? And because some people say because they were like Jewish artisans within the Islamic dynasties or empires, so they kind of integrated it within their work because you know there were also Christian Jewish artisans working with the Muslims. So I mean, of course, there are not one answer to this. I'm sure there are like many ways of interpreting this, and I'm interested in more theories or more ways of seeing like how this symbol was integrated within Islamic like design, but also where especially, like where do we find it more in the Levant, in the North Africa, etc. Because I think in North Africa you find it more than in, for example, Lebanon. So, Muhammad, thank you for answering this question.
Mira, thank you so much for coming. And Mira is a great tour guide. You have to get in touch with her if you're in Lebanon. She, mashallah, is very knowledgeable and a great speaker.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so Mira, like, I mean, it's a really interesting question. So the question is not like who started first, because we're talking about universal values. With universal values, the temporal aspect is not very important because what we're conveying here is a meaning that transcends time. In a sense, what I was trying to say in my presentation, that what symbolism does is freeze moments. In a sense, it puts time into space, right? So when you come to a Sultan Hassan, when you go to the pyramids, of course, but specifically a Sultan Hassan or a Sultan Qalawun or the Masjid al-Aqsa, for instance, like, you know, the Qubbat al-Sakhra, like all of these like great sort of like Ur al-Hamra, what you're basically seeing, Al-Hamra in Spain and Andalusia, what you see is basically a moment that has been taken out of time and placed in space. And that's sacred art, the ability that I'm able to convey to you meanings that transcend that moment and that live on, in a sense, in not eternity, because I don't believe in eternity, but in a sense, it transcends that kind of fleeting moment. It doesn't become just a fleeting moment. So it doesn't matter who came first. It's definitely not. I mean, Jewish tradition is really great, but the Jewish tradition is a nomadic tradition, not known for instance, that same way of settling down, the sedentary city lifestyle in which you have to build. So in the Jewish tradition, the idea is that you're moving from one place to another because you don't want to be attached to the world too much, right? So that's the nomadic aspect of it. So that's why it's more of an auditory rather than a sort of, let's sit down, build a civilization, build and carve and do these types of things. Although they do, of course, of course, at some point. But to say that that hexagonal shape is primarily Jewish or initiated by like the Jewish people, I think is not. I don't see accurate, basically, data for that if we're talking about data. But also you can see the Hindu civilization has had that type of symbolism. It's used very widely in the Indian subcontinent, in Sri Lanka. So it's not, it doesn't belong to that particular civilization. So, but it belongs to the humanity. It belongs to humanity. That's the idea. When it comes to like how, and when it comes to where it's mostly focused or concentrated, I don't know. I haven't read anything or come across anything that says this is the biggest concentration of where this symbol is. I know for a fact that wherever you go around Cairo, it's very common. Islamic Cairo speaking. People are very conscious of it right nowadays. When I used to go with maybe some friends, they would ask me, why do you have the Star of David inside of the mosque? Doesn't make any sense. But as you explain the meaning, I mean, it's on the door. It's on the gate of Cairo. Like I have the picture here, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to spot it. But on the left-hand side, you have the gate of Cairo, Bab al-Futuh. And on the very right hand, or the very right of that arch, you can find the star. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see my zooming, but no, you can't. Yeah. Oh, yeah, there it is. I don't know if you can see it. It's I'm not sure if you're getting the zoom. Do you see the zoom?
Yes,
Yeah.
I've seen it live. So yeah, but
Yeah.
yes,
Oh, you have
it's
seen it
nice.
live
Thank
as well.
you.
Yeah. So basically the idea here is that this symbol is something that comes across, like, the city in so many places. It definitely is in Andalusia. I've seen it myself also in Spain. But I don't know where it's most present. I don't know, to be honest. But it doesn't matter. That's like not a question of quantity. It's a question of meaning. So we say that in traditional arts and crafts, we say that al-ma'na qabla al-mabna, which means meaning comes before the form or structure. So what does it convey? More importantly than what it is, if that makes any sense. But of course, to form something sacred is a process.
Mm.
It's a process. It's a process that is very particular. It's a process that is very, in a sense, ritualistic. It's initiatic in the sense that you belong to a certain like guide, spiritual guide, and that basically guide sees certain images and then he's able to transmit them to the followers or artisans. That's how basically crafts were. They basically were headed by a sheikh, a guide, a spiritual guide. Within the hierarchy, you have basically followers who were able to receive these meanings and they were able to convey them. And that still works until today. This is still the case with some artisans, with very few artisans until today.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Muhammad.
أهلا بيك. أهلا بيك. Amar, I think there was another question about the early forms of Islam.
Yeah. From now on, I think I'll read out the questions for you, so it looks better. Iman Nagy is asking, I would like to know about the differences between early Islamic architecture and its development after appropriation of other architects post-conquest, and how that relates to philosophy. That's quite a loaded question, so Muhammad, good luck, man.
Yeah, beautiful question. I'm not sure about the second part about relating to philosophy, but I'll speak to the first part, which I understood a bit better. So in the early Islamic times, so if you're familiar with Medina, and Medina is basically the ideal city from the Islamic perspective, as you have it in Plato. Everything was very simple. Even the Prophet's mosque was very simple. It had instead of pillars, it had palm tree trunks. And instead of a rooftop, they had these kind of palm tree leaves and no carpets, but actually you had pebbles on the floor. So here, what we say is that at these early times, these Muslims were able to capture everything intuitively speaking. They were very close to their own fitra, and therefore, because they were very close to their own fitra, for them, the manifested world already showed beauty. For them, they could already see with their fitra, with their ability to reflect godly knowledge because of the purity of their souls as a result of being immediate disciples of the Prophet, immediate students of the Prophet, or immediate companions. They were able to clear their hearts, and with that, they can receive beauty. How can you be in God's creation and not see beauty. That's what they would say. So it didn't need to ornament and didn't need to show these meanings. But as we advanced in time, the more we advance in time, the more we begin to be distant from that origin, right? So we need to have more clarity. What is it that we're talking about? We have to actually, in a sense, spell it out. So there was an early development of calligraphy. So it's said that Imam Ali was the one who developed, not invented, the calligraphy. And it was very harsh in a sense that like, the Kufic script was like, composed of vertical and horizontal lines, which is very symbolic in of itself, of course, but very harsh lines. There is not like, proportions. There is not the idea of like, having some kind of a nisba, not al-khat al-mansub. There is no ratios between like different parts of a letter or different letters to one another. Therefore, it was more of a, I don't want to say the word sober because it gives the wrong impression that I want to form, but sober in their day, it already conveyed the beauty of Quran, right? But as we advanced in time with, I think it was the third century, there was the development of the Khat al-Mansub. With that development, you had basically people studying different things and people dealing with different cultures. And this is Ibn al-Bawab, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is the one who has developed al-Khat al-Mansub. If I'm not mistaken, I could maybe get back to you on that if you're really interested. But if I recall correctly, it would be him. And he's the one who basically put like these dots next to the letters. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Arabic calligraphy, but you basically say, the letter Alif is composed of 7 different, like, dots and so on and so forth. The way it looks like this. And everything is really centered around the verticality of the Alif being the first letter of the Arabic calligraphy. So in a sense, you can see that development as a way of explaining what was very clear to the earlier people, as-sabiqun, to the people who came earlier, because they were so close to the origin. That would really explain that development. So the more we decline, the more we advance in time, the more we decline, the more that we need to spell these things out. So that's also part of my, I mean, not me, of course, but like, part of like, the people that I study, for instance, René Guénon's project or Titus Burkhart's project, Dr. Martin Ling's project, is basically to spell out things that were not spelled out before because they were so fitri, they were so intuitive. People knew them intuitively. Why do I have to tell you that minaret suggests mi'raj? You don't have to explain it because people see it. People don't just see it, but they experience it too. They feel like they have left this world behind them and they feel like they've connected to a higher world. So with that, I hope I established some clarity on that question, even though it's a beautiful question, but very, very big as well.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Muhammad.
Muhammad. That was an excellent answer, and you established a lot of clarity. I really appreciate it. I was like, it's interesting concept to me that what you're saying about this need for reminding of spirituality is being rooted in imperialist dynasties that are moving with such violence, and this is like there's some implication of contradiction or irony, let's say, some irony in that that I think you explained very well, but there's probably would require many books to explain, but thank you very much.
But like I wasn't implying the conquest was like, in any sense, I mean, I don't want it to turn into a debate, of course, but that's my view on it. My point is that the conquest was completely unrelated to the whole process of, I mean, the force part of it, because there was always a distinction right from the start, whether we're talking about like, any development for like Muslims, there was always a distinction between the ruler, right, who has political power, and he agrees that he has political power. The Sultan only has political power. Even the Khalifa has political power after Al-Khilafah Rashida, after the first 30 years after the Prophet ﷺ. And society itself runs itself using fiqh and sharia, and the Sultan would never intervene. I mean, he would intervene, but very rarely speaking, and society itself would run its own crafts and arts Of course, learning from other cultures, there's no mistake in learning from other cultures, but I don't see it as a result of imperialism, because I don't want to apply the concepts that I know of, for instance, like British colonialism, Dutch colonialism, and force it upon earlier dynasties, not just Muslim Muslim states and Muslim rulers, but also like non-Muslims, even Christians, even Crusaders. I don't want to apply it there because it doesn't really fit. Because these people were never interested in changing society or culture. They never had that interest, because they were only interested in politics, because that's how societies were divided. This is in the books. It's not my take on it, but that's my take on it is arts and crafts were not influenced by that. There is nothing to indicate that, at least to my knowledge. And there is a structural fact of life that they were split. These powers were split, spiritual and temporal, or political and spiritual.
Okay, I
Should we
think
take another question?
okay. I'll read the next one then. Muhammad Imamuddin Ahmed said, can you shed light on the geometries, squares, octagons, transition to hemispheres? Nice.
Beautiful, beautiful question, to be honest. So again, this is really best conveyed in a dome. Unfortunately, I don't have the plan of a dome with me right now. I wish I had one, but I can show it to you perhaps in the we're not going to be able to see it. Yeah, I was hoping to show it to you in that picture, which is a picture of the, but you can't really see it. So what I wanted to show you with the minaret, if you can see the plan of the minaret, if you can give me a thumbs up, Imaduddin, if you can give me a thumbs up that you can see the left-hand side, there is a minaret, and you can see that the plan of the minaret shows that, I mean, you cannot see it here, but basically it's sitting on a square base, right? So it has 4 sides, right? And as we transition, we realize that that shape is changing from 4 into an octagonal shape, from 4 to 8, right? But then as it transitions from 4 to 8, it transitions into a full circle. So you can say that the 4 sides were basically representative of the 4 elements that we that are known to human civilization, being earth, water, fire, and earth, water, fire. Can't remember. Yeah, so basically like the 4 elements being like, the earthly elements, the sensorial elements. Then you transition into the octagonal shape, which looks more like a circle. It becomes more like, you have like sort of more points, and therefore it becomes more and more undefined. So it becomes more circular. So in sacred geometry, the representation of the square, it represents earth, whereas the circle represents the heaven, right? So whenever you see these icons and panels, what they're suggesting here is kind of a transition, a movement away from earthly concerns, earthly issues, basically into higher domains. The octagonal representing basically the sort of like the, I want to say the imaginal, or alam al-khayal, they call it, the world of imagination, or alam al-mithal, the world of similitude, into the higher world of spirituality. That would be the correct transition. And that you can find very readily in traditional domes and traditional architecture. You can see it very evidently also in Cairo, beautifully, like with that transition zone, with the square transition zone and then the dome. Really beautiful structure. Can I say one more thing on that question? So the 4, as we said, like they represent the 4 elements, right? But they also represent the kind of the in the Islamic tradition, they represent basically that the world right now is managed by 4 archangels, right? Like, or the 4 khulafa, basically the successors of the Prophet. But then on Judgment Day, the 4 become 8, right? So they transition from the number 4 into the number 8, and they have this in Surah Al-Haqqa. I can't remember the number of the surah, but basically in one of the verses it says like, and the throne of your Lord will be carried by 8 mighty angels, or 8 archangels on that day. So there is that transition from 4 to 8 before you reach the circular shape. So it's quite a prominent figure in Islamic tradition, architecturally speaking. I mean.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Shall we go for another question?
I was the one that asked the question. Hope you can hear me.
I can hear you, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah. I'm
Yeah, of course.
joining you all the way from India, Hyderabad. Yeah,
That's really great. Alan,
yeah, the
very
amazing
good to hear
presentation,
you.
brother. Yeah,
Thank you so
yeah,
much. Thank you so much.
yeah,
I appreciate
yeah.
it.
Looking forward to more sort of these kind of things. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I hope
Thank
so.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you have to ask, you have to, cheer for Ammar because he's really the one who basically push for this.
yeah. Amazing, amazing, bro. Mashallah.
Yeah, sure. So
Yeah,
let's go for another
yeah.
question before our time runs out.
Uh, runs out as in, like by 8:30 because we have quick questions. Okay. Another one says is Nebe you. In your opinion, do you think symbolism was maintained all over the architectural and urban typologies in different regions of the architectural world and different timeline? There's different regions of Islamic world. So yeah, do you think the typology was consistent towards around the entire Islamic world?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe that this is the case. But I mean, when we talk about consistency, we don't mean that they had like a catalog that they were sending out to the different like parts of the caliphate or something, saying like, guys, we're going to be building a dome, so it looks that way. It doesn't have to be that way because, for instance, in Iraq, in Samarkand, and basically in Iran, you have very different types of minarets. Although minarets here still convey that meaning of reception from the heavens, they still don't take that kind of like three worldly shape that we have in Cairo, for instance, or in Damascus, in Syria, or the Levant for that matter. So we don't have that kind of same symbolism. But the idea here is that they're conveying the same principles rather than the outward look. So that's more important for us. Because again, like, the point being of this session and of sacred symbolism and arts is meaning is more important than the outward. The meaning itself is more important than what meets the eye. What meets the eye has to be seen through the eye, not with the eye. So don't stop at what the physical sensorial world tells you. Go past it. See what is that about? How is that a reminder of God? Why is that a reminder of God? That's the real question. You can only attain that knowledge through two ways. The first way is basically a spiritual sort of like God is bestowing a meaning upon your heart, so you know that meaning and you want to convey it, or you basically some of your teachers are teaching you that through a book or through basically a conversation or through like the different means of teaching. I mean.
Inshallah, that answers your question. Okay. Next one is Liala. I'm so sorry, guys, for the names. I'm so sorry. Layla, I'm assuming that's Layla. Layla Harun, she's asking, what is the main difference between the symbols in churches, mosques, and synagogues?
The main difference?
What is the main difference between the symbols in churches, mosques, and synagogues?
Okay, so now we're talking. I'm only interested in traditional and sacred arts and crafts, right? And for that, Laila, you have to come join the reading club to read this book. So some of the content of this book includes basically a discussion of Christian and Hindu and Buddhist art, not Jewish. But there can be some sort of discussions of that throughout the book. But generally speaking, there is an agreement across ancient traditional. I emphasize the word traditional civilizations, that there were certain meanings that they were trying to convey to us, and everybody is on board with these meanings. There is like not someone who says like, well, unity is not really our thing, unity is really your thing. They might call it differently, right? But they're still looking at the same thing. But they will have a very different outlook to how they present that in their own in the church or synagogues. So I'm not like not an expert on Christian or Jewish art, to be honest. And I'm primarily more interested in Islamic art and crafts, although I do see links. But again, like I believe for good reason, and I hope to discuss that. I also discuss that usually in the reading circle, the idea of the completeness of Islamic art and architecture, like how it sort of like encapsulates like these other civilizations, not in a kind of removing them from existence or something, or not denying that they ever existed, but on building upon them and showing other meanings and showing other manifestations, theosophies, they call it tajalliyat, like the manifestations of godly attributes.
Mohammed, just a quick thingy. Can you go to
So
your
that's I
contact
hope that
thank
answers
you.
your question. No, sorry.
Sorry.
Can you say again? Can you say again? Couldn't hear you.
Someone was speaking, so I'll let them speak just in case.
I was
Yeah.
saying thank you for explaining. I would love to join the circle you're talking about. Thank you, Muhammad, so much.
No.
Okay, then I think, do you have time for like 2 more questions? 'Cause I feel like there is 2 more questions left.
Let's take 2 more.
Okay. Are there any influences, ideas, ornamentations from Central Asia or the Caucasus on Mamluk architecture, as we know many of them from that region? Look, I'll be honest with you, I'm not too sure about Mamluk myself. I can tell you about the Caucasus and whatnot, and Central Asia, the Turan areas. So maybe I can give you a small thing, but honestly, I'll let Mohammed answer first, and then whatever needs to be added on that.
Ammar, if you want to chip in.
So, honestly, I'll let you take it out because it's focused towards the Mamluks, and I have unfortunately no knowledge about the Mamluks. I can talk about maybe the Timurids and maybe the Safavids, but other than that, honestly, I can't do much. So please go ahead, Mamluk.
So my understanding is that, look, Mamluks sometimes were artisans. Mamluks were usually a military caste. Like in the same way that you have Hindu castes, the Hindu castes were like divided, the society itself was divided into different sort of like classes. At the top of these classes were the scholars, or like, the Brahmins, like the people who know God, basically, who know the divine. Below them, you have basically the warriors. And similarly, in the Islamic tradition, you have basically the ulama, or basically al-fuqara, the poor ones, if you will, the people who know God without any need for this world, the ones who are detached. And then you have basically the rulers. So most of the Mamluks belong to that kind of caste. Although from time to time you would have a Mamluk who would double as a calligrapher, or who would double as a furniture maker, or who would double as some kind of a weaver. The Ottomans themselves, like the sultans of the Ottomans themselves, were known to pick up a craft. Some of them were like jewelry makers. So very interestingly, but that is to say that like, you can't take elements and say like, well, this is really evidently very Damascus. This is from Syria or something. I mean, you have in Sultan Hassan, for instance, one dome that looks very Samarkandian, so like very Central Asian. And you can look it up, Sultan Hassan. I can type maybe the name, Sultan Hassan Dome. In Cairo, Sultan Hassan in Cairo. So you can see the dome itself like is not very Cairo-like, because you can compare it to other Cairo domes, and it looks very different. So you have some elements that are borrowed occasionally from other civilizations, but this implies that some of the workers from these civilizations would come and maybe contribute to the work, or someone has studied there to get the know-how of how would you build something like that, if that makes any sense. But I would say like Cairo has its very unique flavor. Cairo and Damascus, Cairo and the Levant, Egypt and the Levant, they have very similar flavor in terms of the Mamluk architecture. Very distinct from other areas.
Okay, perfect. Okay. I think yeah, that answered the question pretty well actually, yeah. So I'm not going to add much to it. Last but not least, before the recording ends, of course, how are Islamic symbols influenced by the ancient Egyptians, and are they?
Yeah, excellent question. Again, they are influenced, but so it's a really tricky question, because again, like symbolism deals with something that is timeless, right? So to talk about like, a civilization, and to say like, look, they took these ideas from that civilization, at some level, yes, it's somewhat understandable to say that, but also you can see a very distinct style of architecture, very different from everything else. So you can say it's difficult to say like, oh, it came from that place or that other location. But for instance, I'll tell you like one example that popped in my head right now. So the structure of the pyramid is very intriguing, because the base of the pyramid is like a square, but the pyramid itself is composed of 4 triangles, right? Folding itself with one tip. So this is a very clearly like from an Islamic like architecture perspective or geometry perspective, this is a very unique structure, because it transitions immediately from the earthly into the heavenly. So the earthly being like, the 4 points, again, the 4 elements being air, wind, water, earth, and fire. into the one point. The one point is the undefined point. It cannot be defined. So the one point is a representation of the divine, right? So the divine, ليس كمثله شيء. There's nothing like him. There's nothing that is to be compared to him. So it seems like the pharaohs, the builders at least of the pyramids, were familiar with that meaning. But also you see that also in other temples. There's that symbolism of the circle, or the symbolism of the whole notion of the afterlife and everything. There's a lot of emphasis on that in pharaonic arts. But like, I think the question to ask, like, what did they take from them, is quite a tricky one, because it will make us think in today's terms. What I want to do is escape today's terms. What we want to do is basically try and look at the world from a traditional perspective. That is not how the world was looked at in the past. If that makes any sense, I hope it rings a bell.
I think, yeah, you made a great point. I feel like, yeah, you're right. And
Is
people
there
like to skip.
one more question?
We can go one more question. Let me see. Just a second. My cat wants
Let's
to leave
take
the
one
room.
final question.
Excuse me for that. My cat wanted to leave the room. Excuse me. Let me see. Is there a question left? Let me see. Marla Rodriguez says, please, could you write the name of the book? I think that's the last question. Khalas, there's no more questions.
The name of the book is Sacred Art in East and West, Principles and Methods.
Yeah, sure, for you. I think
I'm putting it on
Ahmed would
the
like to say
screen.
something. Sacred
So I'm
Art.
putting it on the screen right now. I hope Maria? I hope Maria can see it. But basically, Sacred Art in East and West, and this is by Titus Burkhardt.
Yeah, I think he wants it to be written down actually, because
sure, yeah.
Titus I have no idea. Yeah, there we go. I think Vida right now.
Titus
Thank you, Vida.
Burkhardt. Yeah, someone wrote it already. Okay.
All right, cool. I think with that, there are no more questions. So I'm going to be hanging out here for like maybe an hour and talk about Islamic societies and whatnot. Muhammad, I'm not too sure if you'll be hanging out with us for much, Yani, but thank you very much for your hard work. And on that, I would like to conclude. Thank you everyone for joining us. Inshallah, this is one of many, because I do intend to have me and Muhammad working together quite a lot, and plus having more guests. I have a ton of guests in my mind. I have one of my friends from Pakistan joining, I think, next week, and he's a traditional architect. He basically builds beautiful traditional Lahore-inspired architecture. That's amazing. We have someone from Spain talking about, he's an expert in Andalusian Islamic architecture. So he'll be here, I think, in 2 weeks. We'll see how that goes. He's very busy. So yeah, the record of the lecture will be, yep, of course, yeah. Well, me and Muhammad, inshallah, will be posting it on YouTube, let's say within the next hour or two. We'll see how that goes. Maybe even tomorrow. I don't know, because it is getting late for me. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That is the end of the